Today we're going to be going over IRS Form 8857, Request for Innocent Spouse Relief. There are several parts to this tax form which we'll go over momentarily, but I did want to take a moment to highlight some of what the IRS considers to be important things that you as a taxpayer should know. So first, do not file this form with your tax return. You'll need to refer to the instructions. There's a section where to file that will give you specific instructions on where to file your IRS Form 8857. You'll also need to refer to IRS Publication 971, which is Innocent Spouse Relief, to help you complete this form and to walk through some of the factors that the IRS considers when they decide to grant innocent spouse relief. You'll also need to attach a complete copy of any requested document or any document that you believe will support your request for relief. The IRS is required by law to notify the person that you list on this form having requested relief, and that person will have the opportunity to participate in this process by completing their own questionnaire about the tax years that you enter on line 3. Finally, the IRS will not disclose your name, address, phone numbers, or employers. However, if you do petition the tax court to review your request for relief, they may only be allowed to consider information that either you or the person on line 6 provided before the final determination. Any additional information that the IRS includes in their administrative file about your request for relief, and then any information that might be newly discovered or previously unavailable. So you should provide the IRS all the information that you want either the IRS or the tax court to consider. So there are a couple of sections I'll briefly outline. The first part is a series of questions about whether or not you should file the tax form. Part 2 is about your situation as well as the person that's listed on line 6 for the years that you want relief. Part 3 is to inform the IRS about how you might have been involved with finances, preparing tax returns, things of that nature. Basically, the IRS wants to understand how involved you were with the specific finances. And then part 4, your current financial situation. Finally, part 5 is the part that you might complete if you have been a victim of domestic violence or domestic abuse. So let's go back to the top of this tax form and we'll walk through it step by step. So in part 1, should you file the tax form, there are a couple of requirements about whether or not a taxpayer might be considered an innocent spouse. Generally speaking, if you believe that the person that you filed a joint tax return with should be solely responsible for errors that might have made it to your tax return, underpayment of tax from your joint tax return, you might be eligible for innocent spouse relief. But the caveat is that unless innocent spouse relief is granted, that both taxpayers who file a joint tax return are jointly responsible for paying tax, interest, and penalties. So, question 1. Does any of the information describe your situation? If you were a resident of a community property state and did not file an income tax return jointly, and you believe that you should not be held responsible, you might qualify for innocent spouse relief, as well as if you believe that your spouse should be solely responsible. Part 2, did the IRS take your share of a joint refund from any tax year to pay down any past due debts that only your spouse or the person that was listed on line 6 owed? So this could be child support, spousal support, also known as alimony, student loan debt, or other federal non-tax debt, federal or state taxes. If the IRS did take your share of a joint refund, then you might be able to claw that back. And that's what IRS Form 8379, injured spouse allocation, would be. If this is not the case, then you should go to line 3 if you answered yes to line 1. So if you answered no to line 1 and you answered no to line 2, then don't file this form at all. So line 3, if you determine that you should file this form, then you're going to need to enter each tax year for which you want spouse relief. So if they used your 2020 income tax return to pay a 2018 joint tax liability, you would enter the tax year 2018, not 2020, because 2018 is the tax year that you want the IRS to look at your tax liability for. So now we move to part 2. So tell us about yourself and the person listed on line 6. Is English your primary language? If not, what is your primary or preferred language? And then your current name, refer to the instructions, but generally speaking, unless you have very specific circumstances, you'll list your name as it was reported on your tax return, as well as your social security number, the address where you wish to be contacted by the IRS, phone number, the best time to reach you, Eastern Standard Time between 6 a.m. and 5 p.m. And then check this box down below on the right-hand side if you would like the IRS to leave you a voicemail. And then for part 6, who is your spouse for the years that you want relief? If you have different spouses, you'll need to file a separate 8857 form for each spouse or each tax year that involved different spouses. So list their current name, social security number, address, and a daytime phone number. For line 7, list the current marital status. If you've been widowed, legally separated, or divorced, then you'll need to attach a copy of the requisite supporting documentation, either a death certificate, separation agreement, or your divorce decree. The entire agreement, not just one page. What's the highest level of education you've completed? Obviously, the IRS will give you different benefit of the doubt depending on your college level, especially if you listed that you have a tax degree. You probably will face a tougher road in granting relief than someone that does not have a tax background. And then line 9, did you have any mental or physical health problems that might have impacted your tax return? And then is there any information that you really don't want to put on the form, but you would be willing to talk to an IRS representative? This might happen to spouses that are fearful for retribution, spousal abuse, things of that nature. There's an entire section in the instructions, and we'll get to that in a little bit, about what the IRS does to protect taxpayer information and safeguard security for special situations that involve domestic abuse. Part 3, tell the IRS how you might have been involved in the finances and preparing returns for the tax years. So line 11, did you intend to file a joint return? Yes, no, provide an explanation. Line 12, describe your involvement, whether you prepared any paperwork, whether you assisted in anything, whether you reviewed the returns. If you were not involved, you do have to write whether or not you agreed to file the tax returns or if you knew that the joint returns were filed in the first place. You'll, in line 11 or line 13, you'll explain what you knew about the person's income. On line 6, when the tax returns were filed, did you know all the different sources of income? If that person had income that you didn't know about, explain why you did not know. If that person was self-employed, explain whether or not and how you help that person with their books and records. Line 14, explain what you might know about missing information on the returns, whether or not there is a deduction or a credit, that you were aware of all the facts that made this item not allowable as a deduction or a credit. If the answer is different for different tax years, then you'll need to explain that as well. If the returns showed a balance due to the IRS, then you'll need to explain when and how you thought the balance might have been paid. Perhaps you thought your spouse was going to send a check to the IRS that never made it. 16, describe financial problems that you might have been having when the returns were filed, such as bankruptcy, bills that you couldn't pay, any kind of financial problems. You need to list them down. If they differed from year to year, then you're going to need to explain what changes in those circumstances happened from year to year. Line 17, were you involved in the household finances? Did you have joint accounts? Did you know whether or not the other person used those accounts? Did you know about any separate accounts that they might have had? For line 18, did you or the person on line 6 make any big purchases? Were there trips, home improvements, private schools, any large purchases that you might have made, like buying a new car or jewelry? Document everything that you might have known about. Line 19, did you receive any assets transferred to you by your spouse? Real estate, stocks, bonds, other property. If there was, then you'll need to provide details such as whether or not there was a mortgage, who was responsible for mortgage payments, whether or not you know that debt was even paid off. Why were the assets transferred to you? If you don't want if you don't own the assets anymore, or you no longer possess them, then explain what the disposition was, what happened. In part 4, you're going to give a little bit more detail about your specific current financial situation. So in line 19, you're talking about transfers of assets to you, and previous to that, in line 18, you're talking about your financial condition when you filed your tax returns. Here in line 20, you're going to itemize each significant asset, real estate, stocks, investments, IRAs. You're going to write a description, fair market value, and then a balance of any outstanding loans you might have used. So a car would look like 2014 Honda Odyssey, fair market value $6,000. You have a loan of $5,000 against that asset. Line 21, how many people are you currently supporting, including yourself? And then line 22 is your monthly income, whether it's gifts from family and friends, whether you have wage income, pensions, Social Security, unemployment, whatever, child support, alimony. All of the different sources of income should add up to a total at the bottom of line 22. And the same with expenses. You're going to go through food and personal care items, transportation, housing and utilities, medical, and then other items, child and dependent care, caregiver expenses, life insurance premiums. These are all things that the IRS might not consider to be discretionary. So be truthful with this input, but at some point, if you're spending, let's just say, $20,000 on clothes, then the IRS might allow a certain part of that as a non-discretionary expense, and then they might disagree that you need $20,000 a month for clothes. Now, Part 5 is the part that you don't have to complete it, but there is additional information in IRS Publication 971, and this part talks about the safeguards that the IRS takes to protect your information. So line 23A, were you or a member of your family a victim of domestic violence by your spouse or former spouse? If yes, then you should complete the rest of it. If this is not applicable to your situation, then just go to Part 6. And then to the extent that you can, describe the abuse, explain how this abuse affected your ability to question items. I mean, this is your chance to tell your story, and realistically, this is how the IRS grants relief in a situation like this. I mean, if you are a victim of domestic violence, financial abuse is under that umbrella. And certainly there are a lot of spouses that are granted innocent spouse relief because of their domestic violence or their domestic abuse situation. And then C and D, are you afraid of the person? Does this person pose a danger to you, children, or other members of your family? And then if you have any documentation, police reports, restraining orders, doctor's reports, medical records, statements, court cases, any of that information, attach that to your claim, because this will all help the IRS better understand your situation. Part 6, you're gonna include any additional information that you would want the IRS to consider. Part 7, right below this, you're going to tell the IRS whether or not you would like to have a refund. And then below that field, you're going to sign. And if you're hiring a CPA or a tax preparer, then there's a space at the bottom of that for your tax preparer. So that takes us to the end of this 6-page form. If you have any questions, we've written a full-length article on our website, teachmepersonalfinance.com. You can go to our website, type in IRS Form 8857 into the search bar, and you'll see this article in full form. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, contact us, or post a comment in the comment section. Thank you.